Hello, hello, hello. We are live. We have Nurse Adrienne and Nurse Scott in the house. Just a heads up, Nurse Scott is experiencing a little bit of a lag, so we will be waiting like 5 seconds if we ask Nurse Scott a question.
It'll be a
How?
pregnant pause.
Yes. Let's catch up, Nurse Adrienne. You had a test that you passed. Tell us about that.
Yes. So I recently returned to bedside, and I'm doing this massive onboarding process and had to take an EKG heart rhythm exam, which they kind of put on me really quickly. And they said, "Here's a PowerPoint." And it's been about 4 years since I've been bedside, so I almost passed the first test, and then I failed on a really dumb rhythm. So it was a little embarrassing, a little bit of a blow to the ego. And they were like, "Well, guess what? You have to pass this test to work. Like you literally have to pass the test to work." So they're like, "We're going to put you in EKG kindergarten, cardiac rhythm kindergarten, and then there's going to be a bigger exam that's not 20 questions, but it's going to be 50." And that's what I had today. And then I just
What
have been
was the
nonstop.
rhythm? Was it like VFib or
The
VTAC
one
or?
I
I was gonna
missed,
ask.
so
Yeah,
I got all the deadly ones right. I got all what we call the
It's a
lethal
heart block.
rhythms
that's
correct.
good.
But yeah, and yeah, the heart blocks, I got all that. I literally missed a fib, which was so embarrassing. Like it was just like I'm a horrible test taker. I have horrible test anxiety. Like I had to get hypnosis before I did the NCLEX. Um, and I just wasn't ready. I just didn't have time to study and
Oh,
really kind
wow.
of look at it all and just some, like when you're in that stress response in an exam, you're like, you could forget your phone number. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, so that was humbling, because they were like, "Oh, you got 17 years experience and you're a cardiac nurse, an open heart unit, blah 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 blah." And I'm like, "Hi, yeah, I don't know anything." So I had to go to heart rhythm kindergarten this week, and did my first shift in the ER, and super fun. Just all the onboarding things, just all the things that come with onboarding in a new hospital. It's kind of like, you're a new grad. I feel like I'm going to nursing school in like 3 weeks. And it's like crammed in. So that's what's, new for me.
Well, and you're coming
Got a
back. You're coming after being away for a while, right?
I'm coming for what? I'm sorry. We had a delay. The delay.
You're coming
Nurse
back
Scott.
to patient care after being away for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been 4 years. I thought, I was like, "Oh, it's been 3.5," but really it was 4 because I was on workers' comp for a while, and I came back for a few weeks, and then I quit, right before the pandemic started. So yeah, I'm super excited. But it is true about the muscle memory, like all the other things, like patient assessment, all that stuff. Just boom, comes right back. No problem with any of that. I'm also learning Epic, which I've never used before. So my brain's a little full right now, and I'm really happy it's the weekend, and I get to keep my job that I have that I really like. And if anybody wants to come to Virginia and work, I'm working for a really great company, and they're offering $20,000 relocation bonuses. So
Well, there you go. Yeah.
relocation money plus a bonus, plus a hiring bonus.
What are your thoughts on Epic? How are you liking that system?
So I was an informaticist for a while with Cerner, and I will say I'm liking Epic, but again, it's 2023. I was a Cerner informaticist in 2013, 14. Everything's evolved. Like I think with EHRs, there's just so many ways. There's just so much to do, right? So if you have trouble, if you're not a like kind of ADHD kind of person where you can handle looking at all these different screens and keep track of things, the overall thing with both that I can feel is like it is still very difficult to know what everything you have to do. Even if you have a task list of things that are overdue, there's just it's very difficult to know, like, have I done it all?
Scott, were
Sorry
you
if
going to
I'm
say
interrupting.
something?
I've always said with Epic, for those who don't know, is a computer system to keep track of. It's your charting, your electronic charting. And my problem has always been that there's so much in Epic. Your screen is just full of all these different tabs and drop downs, and it's great for the And when you want to run reports and find out how many patients came in with heart failure this month and who did that, and you can audit and edit, and you can get to the billing section and the insurance. But for the bedside nurse, it's too much, and it's sometimes you
Yeah.
have to dig to get to the right, little, like Adrian was saying, the right little area to chart that you started an IV or something. So you never really learn to like Epic. You make your peace with Epic. That's been my perspective.
I think with these EHRs, we call them, for folks who don't know, EHRs or EMRs, electronic health record, electronic medical record. It even more requires that you basically have everything memorized about your patient because, you've got to get on the computer. That takes time. You've got to, hopefully hit the right window to see what's going on. What meds is a patient taken? So you really do have to have a good grasp of your patients. I think it's a little different than, because I started back in the day of paper. Oh my God, I know.
Scott, read the read the private comment.
What? What?
I saw the tail wagging, kind of going a little bit. And they get really frisky, Scott.
They are
I don't know
going
why.
after.
They just
I sent them. I
Right
sent
now, they're
them
going after the new blanket and the new toy. One of my schoolmates
They're
got
like,
a care package, and it had all this stuff in it, including stuff for the doggy. So they're like, "Oh, new blanket, new chew toy." So I don't know that they're going to hump. Let me know, and I will throw some water on them.
I sent them a private message. I was like, question of the day, will Scott's dogs hump again? Because they were humping in our live last week.
I think it's been a few. The dogs have kind of they're just trying to take over is what's happening.
So my experience I did use Cerner, and I feel like Cerner was easier for me to adapt to and learn. And then Epic, I used it as a nurse practitioner. And for me, it was harder to pick up Epic than the actual job, right? Like when I started as an NP, I was like, my actual job duties are fine, like examining, diagnosing, prescribing, but and the thing with Epic, I don't know if Adrian, your system has changed, but Epic has hard stops. So it's like I couldn't move on
Right.
to a next section unless I had input these results in a certain area, or if I didn't input because where I worked, it was like payment too. So I don't like that if you get stuck on a certain thing, like it's a hard stop and you can't move if you didn't chart something that needed to be charted in that area. Or even if it's not even that necessary, but it just stops you. And I hated that, trying to figure out, okay, what error did I do here? What was going on?
Yeah. And I don't know, I'll be curious to see because I was a physician trainer. So I actually was very much involved with the physician and the provider end of Cerner and then teaching ICU critical care nurses how to use it also. So those are the two areas I work mostly in. But so I was working on the back end design and then integrating all the other apps like drag and dictation, which is that's another whole handful of mess, teaching dictation services to providers. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, already in the ER, because I'm in an observation unit, of course, the providers are in the ER, so they're in the ER version. So if you're an OR, there's a type of, I don't know, module you use. If you're an ER, it's a different module than the inpatient. So if they enter orders in the ER part, we don't, where I'm at in my unit, even though it's in the ER, we don't have access to those same labs. So the point of care testing that everything that they have. Hey, what's going on? So yeah, so already just one day we've had I've seen where we've had to ask the NPs or the PAs, hey, can you re-enter this order so that it's an inpatient order for labs, etc. But yeah, it's I mean, it's just the way it is. But Epic is the one to really learn. That's the one most places use. I like things really streamlined. I like to be able to read my provider notes, see what's going on with my patients. But again, I'm in an obs unit, so these are people that have just come in. But what I liked, in Cerner, it was fairly easy to look at people's prior records. I haven't gotten that deep in Epic to see how it is. But yeah, I mean, I like to know what's going on with my people. So, but yeah, I don't think these electronic health records have made anything easier for providers or nurses. You know, I don't. There's a lot going on that screen. That's for sure.
Yeah, the only thing
And
I
I
feel
think it's
like
the
it's
other end. Like I said, when you want to run an audit or something and collect data, it makes that a lot easier.
Right.
and I think at least in regards to like orders, like I have awful handwriting, so it makes reading orders easier. Um, but and a few nurses that have been around, for a while, they do say that the amount of clicking and tasks and everything that we have to complete now, that it's like, what time do I have to actually assess the patient when I have a million tasks to complete, on the, like, check off all these boxes, essentially, that I did this, I did that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's time, so you have your timeline, you see things are overdue. Yeah, I mean, I think that in the overall, there's Epic is probably a little bit better. But again, the thing to always remember is whatever system you work for, they're buying certain pieces of these EHRs and they may not be buying all of it. So again, there's a lot of a la carte that goes on the menu. And so there's certain components that don't get all purchased that maybe you see it in that one system and you're like, hey, why doesn't this system have, this part or this function? Because that system didn't pay for it. These are super, super expensive softwares, right? I mean, look at the Epic. If you want to know how expensive they are, just Google Epic. And where are they? Minnesota? Is it Minnesota or Wisconsin? Their campus. It's like Disneyland. They got a lot of money.
I feel so. Jay Michael says he can do 18 minutes per chart. I feel like when I was in Cerner, I could do, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. Like, it was not taking me 18 minutes per chart. That's a lot, especially if you have like five or six. I mean, it depends to where you are, how high acuity your patients are. I've never charted as an RN in Epic, so I can't really attest to that. But I mean, that's still pretty a lot of time, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it depends too. If your system is like inputting all the vital signs. To me, the fact that you still have to like go in and do your eyes and O's, like you know, that
Well,
is
like you said,
valuable.
everyone is different. They customize it for whoever
Yeah.
buys it. So the Epic I use at my hospital may not look a whole lot like the one you use at yours.
Yeah, exactly. But that is the way of the world. So there is no way around it. I think the hardest part though is really for providers that go to multiple sites where they've got to use all these different EHRs in their offices, hospitals. But hey, at least we're not using Meditech, right? Unless you work for you know who. 'Cause Meditech sucks.
Okay, well, let's get into the topic of the day.
Thank you.
So really, really sad topic. Let me open this up here so that you guys can read it. Who would like, well, actually, Adrian, we'll start with you, and then Scott, by the time you read it, you can just start reading after Adrian finishes like her first paragraph. But let me scroll down here. Adrian, if you want to read the first part.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a case that took place in a Providence hospital in Washington, Everett, Washington, Providence Regional Medical Center, Everett. So after a patient died while waiting for care in an emergency department waiting room in Washington State, the woman's husband has filed suit against the hospital, Providence Regional Medical Center, Everett. Sean Costello, individually and on behalf of the estate of Cheyenne Costello, alleged that his wife's death at the age of 41 in November 2022 was the result of being left to languish in the emergency department lobby for about 4.5 hours without proper monitoring and or assessment, according to a complaint filed October 12th, 2023 in King County Superior Court.
Hold on, it's not scrolling. Okay. Scott? Where I lost my place now. Here we go. Okay.
A coroner's report noted that Cheyenne had acute and chronic pancreatitis with pseudocyst, resulting in a probable cardiac dysrhythmia. Costello's complaint stated that the alleged negligence included in the failure to timely room, examine, test, warn, monitor, intervene, and otherwise render the necessary care. The thought that just getting a lab result and acting on it could have saved this woman's life was heartbreaking to me. Marlena Grundy, JD of PNW Strategic Legal Solutions in Bellevue, Washington, who is representing Costello in his lawsuit, told MedPage today. The medical negligence and wrongful death suit comes roughly after a year after Providence Regional Medical Center Everett responded to local leaders' concerns about nurse staffing levels and reports of Cheyenne's death. The letter that the medical center sent to Snohomish County Council and Everett City Council members highlighted that, similar to other healthcare facilities across the country, it had been greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay. On the night of November 2nd, 2022, Cheyenne, a vibrant, much-loved mother of 3, was transported via the Snohomish County Fire Department to Providence Everett's emergency department with stomach pains, the complaint stated. Upon arrival, she was told to wait in the waiting room, where she was left for about 4.5 hours without ever being placed in a room or examined by a doctor until she started having seizures and ultimately died. Hours before her death, hospital staff at Providence Everett allegedly instructed an EMS crew to take her to the emergency department lobby and place her there until she could be seen, according to the complaint. She was placed in a wheelchair in the lobby because there were no open seats, and she was provided blankets to stay warm. A registered nurse assigned Cheyenne an emergency severity index of 3, which is considered urgent. An RN is also alleged to have assigned her a modified early warning system score, which evaluates a patient's physiological state based on heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, body temperature, mental state, and urine output of 4. MEWS score of 3 is considered critical and requires the patient to receive extra attention. A doctor, Adrian, go ahead and read this part. Oh, I can't hear you, Adrian. You're muted.
Sorry, I muted myself. A doctor documented Cheyenne as critically ill with significant risk to decompensate and even death, requiring prompt bedside evaluation and intervention, the complaint noted. In addition, a triage nurse, and triage is a nurse you see when you first go into an ER, and then they figure out how, what level of care you need. A triage nurse is alleged to have entered standing orders that were signed by a physician, with the orders including a comprehensive metabolic panel. This is a lab draw, a blood draw that gives a lot of information in it. However, this test was not completed until approximately 5 hours later, apparently after she had died.
Wow.
The complaint stated, adding that the doctor said the test showed Cheyenne was severely hypokalemic. Hypokalemia means low potassium, can be very dangerous. All the above signify a patient as being in critical condition and requiring immediate rooming and assessment by a physician, the complaint noted. Had the metabolic test been timely performed, staff would have had enough time to diagnose her pancreatitis and correct the potassium imbalance. Ultimately, Costello alleged that Providence Everett leadership failed to ensure that their staff was trained competently and or given the essential resources to recognize and assess a critically ill patient and take the proper interventions and or provide the requested needs to mitigate a serious patient safety risk. Do you want to finish the rest of that, or do you want me to do that?
Scott, you can finish it.
Healthcare providers at Providence Everett did not meet the standard of care to keep Ms. Costello safe by mitigating preventable and predictable harm, the complaint concluded. Costello is seeking damages of a yet-to-be-determined amount. A spokesperson for Providence Everett did not immediately return a request for comment from MedPage today.
So real quick, before we went live, Nurse Adrian was like, oh, this is the place where a year ago a nurse brought up staffing at that hospital system. And so that occurred in November, August, September. So months before this actually occurred, an ER nurse said, Heidi said the pain and suffering at the Providence Everett emergency department isn't exclusive to patients. The nurses are feeling it too. It's defeating, showing up every day, knowing these people need us, and we can only do what we can. She said, we felt quite abandoned there. Heidi is a nurse in Providence Everett's ER. She asked us not to use her last name because she fears being blacklisted by hospitals across the country for speaking out about problems at Providence. The hospital's ER is seeing up to 300 patients a day. Sometimes there are 10 patients for every one nurse, with patients waiting in the lobby for up to 12 hours. At its peak, there could be 33 nurses on duty in the ER, but the actual number is usually about half of that, according to Heidi. Hospital officials said Providence has lost 200 nurses this year alone. The situation is so serious, certain section of the ER have to close down. So that, just putting that into context of what happened to this poor woman, what are your thoughts?
Well, when, first it's impossible for an ER nurse, any nurse to take care of 10 patients in that kind of setting. I mean, that that's just going to lead to more burnout and an extremely dangerous situation. This is what we, consider, um, a level of fatigue, it's called moral fatigue, right? When you're not able to do what you know you should be doing, or you're being forced to do things that are against your values or against what you know to be the right thing to do. That leads to moral fatigue. And that is really a difficult um, mental state for a nurse to be in or any provider to be in, especially chronically, right? It happens once, it shouldn't be happening. But this is coming right off of COVID, where there also, it sounds like, other issues going on there. They were already hemorrhaging nurses. So yeah, this is this woman, I mean, she went to the city council even, but again, this is going to be the status of a lot of hospitals right now. And with this volume, these hospitals, and Scott can speak to this more. Hospitals usually will go on triage, right, if they're not able to care for patients. But if all the hospitals are in the same situation, they're not going to go on, I'm sorry, they're not going to go on diversion. Um,
So, I
Yeah,
mean,
when
let
it
me
gets to the point where it's not safe to take new ambulances, the hospital will go on diversion, telling EMS not to bring patients in. But again, like we say, this hospital is closed. You have to go to this hospital. Oh, they're on diversion. You have to go. So when everyone is closed, everyone is open again because you have to have someplace to take the patients. And a couple things came to mind as I listened to the story. One was this nurse who brought up the low staffing. It's kind of a crapshoot. I was thinking a nurse at any hospital could lodge a complaint about low staffing, and then odds are something bad is going to happen at one of them. And this is the nurse that won the lottery. She brought it up, that we're low staffed and we're in trouble, as many other nurses do. And then as it happens, this was the hospital where something bad happened. That's not to take away from the fact that it's a problem or the fact that this accident happened, or not an accident, but that this tragedy happened. I wanted to say too, it's really hard with abdominal pain to know, do you have indigestion and heartburn? Do you have gallstones? Do you have an inflamed appendix? Do you have pancreatitis? Do you, like this woman had? There's so many things that can be in abdominal pain that it's difficult. Now the triage nurse, the first nurse, used the Emergency Severity Index, or ESI, which is very simple and it's standardized across the country. You use their vital signs and their complaint and how much pain they're in, things like that, and they get a score from 1 to 5. 5 is you can go home and see your own doctor if you want to. 1 is like, we need to resuscitate you now. 2 is very urgent. We need to make space for you and get you in. 3 is somewhere in the middle, and 4 is like an urgent care. So this woman was placed at a 3 based on her vital signs, which were probably stable when she first came in. And even though she was uncomfortable, that's why she wasn't a 4. Abdominal pain is usually, that. But if she's in the waiting room that long, they should have a policy to recheck vital signs every hour at least on the patients that are waiting. I know that's a big ask when you have a huge emergency department waiting room full of patients, but that I think that's a standard. At least the places that I've worked have wanted us to do that.
Mm-hmm. I also want to just add, though, this is the thing that gets me about hospitals over and over again. Okay, so I understand 2022, everybody's hemorrhaging nurses. There is absolutely no excuse to not have techs or CNAs and to be able to train them, bring them in, to be there doing vital signs, to be there at least checking in on people. There is Zero
It's true.
excuse, and the public doesn't really understand that component. Even the system I used to work for refused an offer to bring in and be a clinical site in the midst of COVID at the height to say, "Hey, we'll provide 30 CNAs for you. We'll teach them, we'll train them," because I worked for a school. "Can you just be the clinical site and we pay them $15 an hour?" No, don't want to. I mean,
Mm.
so again, it's not always, we talk about the nursing shortage, but sometimes it's not always just nurses that can be part of the solution. There's a lot of other people in the care team that could be brought in at, it takes 2 years to make a nurse, 2 or 3 years to make a nurse. It takes a month to make a CNA, a little bit longer to make a tech or a
You make a really
phlebotomist.
good point. Not to, not to oversimplify this case, but one ER tech could have saved this woman's life. One CNA could have been checking vital signs every hour and picked up that something was up and got that patient back
One tech
faster
could
and
have
saved
done
her
that
life.
lab draw, having tech. Yeah. I
Here's
mean,
my so
Yeah,
okay, so in
I was in the emergency department last week, and they said, "I'm sorry, we're full," but the triage nurse put an IV in my arm, drew some blood. She goes, "Well, go ahead and send this off. We'll do an EKG here in the triage chair, and you go wait." And I had to wait an hour in the waiting room, but at least they got some things going. Now, that's not an apples to apples comparison, but there are things you can do for a patient without bringing them back into the treatment area.
mhm.
and I do recognize I've worked with some phenomenal CNAs, right? But I I do think that staffing, we RN staffing is critical, is important, because I've also worked with other CNAs that roll your eye at you when you ask them to go get the patient some water, or they roll their eyes at you because you need help changing a patient, or if you, God forbid, you tell them to go into a room by themselves to change a patient, right? Or I found them in the linen closet talking to whoever on the phone. So it's like at that point in time, it's almost like I don't have a CNA helping me. Like I'm doing everything myself. And then I'm not the kind of
A
person,
bad
I'm
CNA
not,
is worse than no CNA.
I didn't hear you, Scott.
A bad CNA is worse than no CNA.
Yes, and I'm not confrontational and I don't like attitude, so I'm not gonna sit there and argue with her, get into a power struggle. I'll just do it myself, right? So a lot of times that was what I was running into. Um, and then I've never worked in the ER, but for example, like Heidi here says Heidi recently made a tearful plea. She's essentially begging. And again, this is such a hot topic for me. Staffing in, like, improving patient staffing in nursing is one of the topics I'm so passionate about, because even before COVID, I was a nurse way before COVID. Staffing was still abysmal. So what's their excuse? What is their excuse? It's always been bad, and then with COVID it got terrible. And it's putting patients' lives at risk, because
Mm.
it's a lot harder for us to do our job well when we're juggling so many metaphorical balls, right? We have so many things in the air. It's easier for something to drop.
Absolutely. And these are, we talk about community expectations, right? So the community on the outside, right, is thinking, hey, there's a hospital here, there's a hospital there. Great. We got hospitals. We're going to be taken care of. There's an expectation by communities. And there's, again, this is a not for profit. I put up, they hemorrhaged a ton of money in 2022, which is really interesting. But I mean, they also don't pay property taxes because they're a nonprofit, right? They get a ton of tax exemptions, money that would go into a community or into, other pockets in a state that don't, because they're a nonprofit. And so nonprofits have even a greater obligation to provide for communities because of the tax benefits, right? Um, and so it's really, the public just doesn't understand, and we've yet to figure out how to really involve the public in the call to action of what we need, right? This has been the dilemma for years. How do we get the public to really be involved, and who do they go to? They want to know. A lot of people do want to know, hey, what can I do? But all they're going to get is a PR machine out of any hospital or healthcare system. It's the board of supervisors, city councils, they only have so much, say. Providence, for folks on the that are not on the West Coast, is a massive Catholic system from Alaska to Southern California. And they primarily have been, other than 2022, extremely, extremely profitable, aggressively profitable system, I want to say, of all nonprofit systems on the West Coast.
I guess if you're it's equivalent to like Advent Health here on the East Coast. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Mhm.
But that is Seventh-day Adventists. But again, many, many hospitals, probably one of the most uh, renowned names over on the East Coast.
Yeah, I mean, this is again the giving referral bonuses is one part of the can be one solution. Giving retention bonuses can be one part of the solution, but it is really hard when you're down that many nurses and you're using 85% travel nurses, or it's hard when you're in it, right? It's like you're in the war, you're in the battle, and I won't say the enemy, right? But the public, the number of patients coming in, it doesn't matter. Like, you need help right away. And then day after day, all you're thinking is, great, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to have 10 patients. I'm going to have 8 patients. I'm going to end up being, redonda vod. I'm going to end up being a nurse in front of not only my board, I'm going to be a nurse on trial for my life, because it's just a numbers game. There's going to be a bad outcome one way or another. There's really no way around
Well, it's
it.
not
And
even
there's tons of
that. The job satisfaction, the day-to-day experience is just wearing on you, and you call it
yeah.
compassion fatigue or moral fatigue. And it's true. Why do people become nurses? Because they want to earn an honest living, helping their fellow man in this in this particular role. And I don't think any ER nurse is afraid of hard work. We go in, we know we're going to have patients come in, and some are going to be really sick, and some are going to be really easy, and some are going to get on our nerves, and that we kind of like that. But when you give us, too much to do at one time, with the knowledge that if you don't do it fast enough, this person over here is suffering. That's a whole different thing. That's a whole different level of stress. So it's not that the ER nurses are like, no, it's too much work. It's not, but it's too much responsibility. It's too much pressure to do, these certain things. And so it makes day-to-day life. I've been through this, and it's frustrating. You just have to say, look, we're helping people as fast as we can. We're helping the ones quickly that need it in order to survive, and the ones that are waiting, I know they're uncomfortable, but we're doing the best we can, and try to take a deep breath and kind of control our stress through the whole thing, or else you'll never get through your shift.
So, like, this is another page that said, in regards to that hospital system, that the nurse staffing was worsening. It's contributing to burnout, decreased quality of care, uh, as well as the fear of patient harm or the loss of licensing if mistakes are made. And I'm glad that this lawsuit seems to be targeting the hospital system and not individual nurses, because it is a system issue. It is a system issue. I'm not going to say that all nurses are angels. I'm not saying that either, but having worked in nursing, being in the trenches, you realize it's like we're set up to fail. Like, we have to go above and beyond. Sometimes, like, I would get there before my shift, before I could even clock in, just so I could start looking my patients up. How am I going to organize my day? I've not only myself, but nurses I've talked to, the day before a nursing shift, we have knots in our stomach. We have anxiety. What are we going to walk into tomorrow? What's it going to be like? Are we going to have 5, 6 patients? Are they going to be walkie-talkies? Are they going to be totals? Am I going to be able to handle it? Like, it's a lot. And Scott, what you were saying in the ER, I've never again worked in the ER, but the stakes are so high in nursing that especially in the ER, if you don't do
And
something fast enough, if you don't do something quick enough, people's lives are at stake. That's a tremendous amount of pressure. And then to add, 10 patients, it's ridiculous. I can't believe that they have got away with this for so
we are lucky
long.
in California. We are lucky in California to have nurse-patient ratios mandated by state law. So we have a max of 4 in the ER, unless there's emergency conditions, which you can just call randomly. But for the most part, most of the places I've had have tried to keep it to 4, or one of your 4 or 2 of your 4 that are worked up and just waiting on lab results or whatever. They'll pull into the hallway and put a new patient in. So maybe you'll have 5 or 6, but 1 or 2 of those will be just waiting on labs or something. So that kind of legislation really makes a difference where, boots on the ground.
Mhm. And the enforcement of it. I mean, California has been really weak on enforcement of it the last few years. It's been an issue. They are now enforcing Title 22 and the ratios. It did get a little bit out of control, which that's a whole other topic of how that happened with the governor. But I want to also add in, you guys. So this hospital. So I just saw pulled up another article about this, or just about this hospital. So there's 600 nurses have left or retired since 2021 from this hospital. I don't know what the total staffing is, but again, they talk about this emergency department, and this is a level 2 trauma, one of only 2 in that whole region. I can't remember wherever it is. But this is a union hospital. The nurses just voted a week ago to go on strike with UFCW Local 3000. So this is I think we're going to be hearing more about this hospital. I don't know if there's an update on their bargaining or contract, but this lawsuit is certainly fuel for the strike and fuel for the nurses and fuel to pass state and federal legislation on staffing ratios, because it doesn't matter where you're at. You shouldn't be getting worse care because you're not in California and you're not in a facility that has ratios. And ERs, I think, have just gone, from what I know from nurses I talk to around the country, have gotten out of control with the number of patients they are giving nurses, with 6 being the norm now, 8 not being abnormal. Same thing with ICU. It's like the new normal is 3 patients rather than 2. This is
it's kind of different. Again, sorry if I'm interrupting. The ICU, those are critically ill patients. In the ER, I'm not trying to say it's right, but I could have 6 patients, depending on who those 6 patients are. If they're just waiting on labs and they're not very, needy,
Sure.
they're not, we've got them tucked in, as we say, then that's doable. But you never know what you're going to get. She brought up just real quick, she brought up the emergency severity index here on the screen, and you will see that under 3 urgent, you see stomach pain. Now, there's more to it. I don't know if you want to show it or not, but there's actually a little diagram of like blood pressure between this and this, you get 1 point, and between this and this, you get 2 points. And, there's ways there's a little formula to come up with that. It's not just categorical. Oh, stomach pain, you're 3. Stomach pain with bad vitals might be a 2. So it's more complicated than that. Anyone who's interested in
Yeah, I was trying to show the simplified
like
version, but then the more like in-depth ones require payment.
Oh, yeah, you got to pay to play. So this is another thing I just read in this article, is that the state of Washington has what is it called? The lowest hospital beds per capita of any state.
What state?
Washington. So there's fewer beds. So basically, Washington State is the most dangerous state to get into a hospital, because it has the least amount of beds per capita. The least amount of beds per capita, which is really surprising. But again, as population shift, if we're not building more hospitals to get to capacity, then that's a problem when you have populations really expand, and it's expensive. California, it costs $1.5 million per bed to build a hospital, at least. So again, this is, a very dangerous situation. People don't think about those kind of things, like, what is the population density and how many beds are there, right? Is there a cath lab at the hospital near me? Whatever it might be. So
yeah. And usually, like, the smaller the hospital, the less they're going to be able to do there, so.
Absolutely. And I think, but I think this case is really, I'm curious to see this case evolve, because of the fact that they're saying they drew labs after this woman passed away.
I know.
Oh, I mean, that just is cover up right there, right? I mean,
yeah. Go ahead, Scott. What do you think?
Scott's like, maybe not.
Is that common practice? I mean, again, I didn't work in the ER, but I've never seen anybody come after someone passes and be like, let's draw labs.
They do during an autopsy, obviously. But I don't know. I can see it being done. It's like, well, we pronounce her. Geez, we didn't expect her to die. She was in the waiting room. Why don't we go ahead and send some labs on her, and that'll, help us understand what happened. I can see that happening, but no, it's not commonplace at all.
Too little, too late, in my opinion.
Yeah, it really just doesn't. I mean, I don't know. Anytime I've ever even been a patient in the ER, it's like they just automatically draw a CBC and a metabolic panel. That's just, or they take some blood just because they know you're going to need some blood for something, right? I mean, I've never not had blood drawn, even, it's like, we're going to need it. We're going to start an IV. We're going to take some
It
blood
can
because we know we're
happen
going to need it.
though. If you're gonna be in the emergency department, if you're gonna be in the waiting room for an extended period of time, it is sometimes, in a large ER, in the smaller ERs like the one I just went to, it was busy, the beds were full, but it wasn't like tons of people waiting and all that. But I've worked in really large urban emergency departments where we have like 20 people in the emergency in the waiting room, and we keep I work triage a lot, so I did try to keep an eye on what was going on, and I knew I want to recheck this one in a few minutes, in an hour, because she looked pretty, so I kind of did that, but there wasn't the staff to actually go and like, let's just start IVs on all 20 people and draw some blood on them and get a doctor to write the order. It was impractical. So it depends on the size of the department.
Well, when I
Mhm.
went to the hospital, there was no one checking in the waiting room, so nobody was checking or even. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is the importance of having someone there to advocate for you. And I wish my experience was unique. I wish my awful, terrible experience at my hospital was unique, but it's not. So, I recently had a friend from high school, and she was in the ED, and she says like they literally almost let her die too, so
Mhm.
make sure, if possible, take a loved one to the hospital with you so that they can advocate on your behalf in case you pass out, in case you can't advocate for yourself. I literally, I've shared this before. When I was in the hospital, they didn't leave a call light next to me. I called my husband. I think he was like an hour away. I was like, you need to get here now. They're going to let me die. They're not giving me any medication. They're not doing anything for me. And I don't feel right. I may not make it. So he got himself there, and he would, because again, they weren't coming to us. He was the annoying patient that was in the hallway, like, hey, can you get her medication for her heart rate? Because we didn't know it at the time, but I had COVID. My heart rate, laying down, I was in the 130s, going in like 130s, 150s. I felt like I was dying when my resting heart rate is 60. No, they wouldn't give me a freaking beta blocker. I was the one that was like, can I please get something for my heart? Can you give me a beta blocker? I don't know. Again, the nurse took forever. You would have thought I was begging for Dilaudid. So it took my husband, like, hey, you haven't brought it, multiple times in the hallway, because I couldn't get up, So have someone there that can advocate for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's
So
such a
true. I
good
was just
point.
in the hospital having count them, two surgeries. I went in and had back pain, and my surgeon was on call and did my back surgery. I'm like, great, this is great, because I've been wanting to get this, setting up a time for the surgery, and my sciatica was awful. But I came out of it with worse pain than I went in with, and it was really, really bad. It was really debilitating, and they were like, "This is post-op pain." Sent me home. I went back to the hospital for pain control, and was there in a couple more days. And the doctor was telling me, something you just have to live with. You've got a complex relationship with pain because of your history. I'm like, I'm not even sure what that means. And I was advocating for myself. I'm like, give me answers. Like, what can we do? What's wrong? Is this normal? Um, but I was this close, and then I went back a third time, and fortunately they redid the MRI and redid surgery, and I feel great. That was like a week ago, and I was this close though to not being able to advocate for myself. I'm like, am I going to have to fly my mom in here or my brother? Because it's where when you're in pain, it wears you out. It takes so much of your energy. It's funny that you say, begging for Dilaudid, because I got my Dilaudid on schedule when I was in the hospital. So maybe you should have asked for Dilaudid instead of a beta blocker.
Um, I, eh, I don't, my ADHD. So I literally had something to say, and then my husband's home. I heard the garage open, and it just woof, left my brain. So go
The
ahead.
brain. Yeah, I mean, definitely have an advocate. I mean, there's a lot of things that people face. I have a good friend who, um, you know, r- had a very, very bad experience with sickle cell, and basically got racially profiled in a hospital in the ER in California, was denied pain medication, and he is a provider. And this is, you've got to be the squeaky wheel, and go up that chain of command, whatever it might be. And I'm sure I'm guessing this woman, who knows if somebody was with her, if she's got 3 kids. I'm guessing maybe the husband was, with the kids. I don't know. But again, take somebody with you, let somebody know, or via phone. I mean, you guys know I'm a private patient advocate, with my friend. I mean, like, I got on the phone with the ER. He ended up going to a different
Oh,
ER,
oh, yeah.
but you got to get, you can do it on the phone as well. So it doesn't, if you can't get somebody there with you, get somebody who can get on the phone and make those calls and escalate and go up the chain of command. And that chain of command, if you're in the ER, is going to be obviously asking for the nurse, the charge nurse, the manager of the or director of that unit, and the house supervisor, the medical director, administrator on call. That's the chain of command in a hospital situation to utilize. Um, but again, this, you know,
Yeah, that's such an important thing to know before you go in that most people don't know is how is the ER or how is the hospital structured? And that was one of the early videos I did on my channel. So this is being simultaneously broadcast on all 3 of our channels, but on my channel, I'll put a link down below to that video so you can watch it and know like who to complain to. How do you complain in the hospital? And it's
and I'll
important to know
tell
before
you
you
on
need
this
that
on
information.
this situation, right? There's for sure cameras in that ER. So there's going to be video documentation of this woman sitting in that wheelchair, and they're going to be able to zoom right in on what's happening to her. And that this is not going to go well in court. Of course, they are going to settle out of court. There won't be a trial unless there's some criminal charge. Now, I almost kind of hope, I wish that these DAs would start to, think strategically and go after these hospital administrators and the leadership of these hospitals and medical directors, because get them on criminal charges, because then that becomes public. You cannot sign away and make, you cannot cash out on a criminal charge, because this will end up getting settled out of court, no doubt. And then will not know any details of it, unfortunately. And they'll sign the husband will sign a non-disclosure, get a check. But because here's the other thing, a mother of 41, just on the part about a wrongful death, a woman 41 years old with 3 kids, right? So juries will rule on the longevity of somebody's life, their purpose. So she's raising 3 children. So now that's impacted 3 other human beings. Um, I would not be surprised if this were to go to a trial, that a jury would award a massive, massive award. And I don't know what the limits are, if there's limits in Washington or what there are. I mean, like, there are limits in California, but these kind of cases, you're going to see a very empathetic, compassionate jury, right? They're not going to have any mercy for the hospital system in any kind of judgment and award. So, and there could be, they could even move and do pain and suffering. They could do a civil case as well. In addition to the malpractice case, they could have multiple cases on this issue. So, I'm really curious to see how this evolves. So, you know, this is clearly because the way the nurses and because this nurse Heidi, that's a pseudonym, I'm assuming, because there's documentation that, hey, these nurses went to the public, right? That's another not too good thing, right? I mean, this is like, we've documented it, we've gone to the public, we've said, hey, we are hemorrhaging here. The patients in this community are not being taken care of.
So I'm not sure who makes, how high up on the leadership these decisions are made for staffing, but I will draw a parallel. So for example, I have a friend that works as a housekeeper, and she tells me that the CEOs or managers essentially get bonuses for how efficient they run their facility, or it's not units, but like their hotel, right? So what my friend tells me is that the CEOs essentially will forego investing in things that the hotel needs because they want to pocket that bonus at the end. Whatever they don't use, they're pocketing. And part of me is very curious, is that what's happening in these hospitals? Like, do they get bonuses? And this is just me questioning, hypothesizing, but perhaps the reason why they are doing this is because it financially profits them to run the hospital as bare bones as possible to increase what they make at the end of the
So they do.
year. And that is just unforgivable. And I agree with Nurse Adrian that it is exactly those individuals in charge in those positions of power that are making these decisions. Okay, well, who says that it has to be 6 nurses on this med tele floor instead of 4 or 5, right? Who's making these decisions? That's who should be held accountable.
Absolutely. And so there is because it's a nonprofit system, that information is fairly public. It's usually a couple of years behind. So just as an example, 2019, the CEO of the whole system made almost $11 million, like the whole system, right? The CEOs, let's see, there's a chief executive for Washington and Montana. They made almost $2 million. So it looks like CEO pay per hospital is somewhere around 2 million, something like that. Now, again, Providence hemorrhaged money. They had a massive, massive loss in 2022. So, yes, you're exactly right about bonus structures and how they work. And there's always this move to cut. But I think the issue here is even beyond that. It's supply and demand. It's cost of living in these areas. It outpaces what the pay is for the nurses, the recruitment. Everybody's competing for nurses right now. I think we've gone into some next level. So if people are thinking, and again, they're paying for travel nurses, which we know that costs a lot of money. That's going to run you about $150 an hour on for the hospital end. It's not what the nurses are making, but 125 to 150 at least. So again, we've got to figure out a different model here of sustainability within healthcare. And bringing in a lot of travelers is just
It's a Band-Aid.
you're draining money, right? It's not long. You're going to drain money just like Providence did. You're going to hemorrhage money on one end. You're not bringing money in because, again, if you can't see all those patients and they're sitting there in the waiting room, you're not going to bill for them. You're not getting them through the system to bill for them and getting compensation for
There's
them.
a
So,
small percentage that leave without being seen, actually. Most of those people are actually gonna wait. Now, they're gonna not be happy, but they will eventually get in, and the hospital will eventually bill for their care. If we remember back, a year ago when we were on with Nurse Liz, her whole perspective, and this is not my area of expertise. Adrian knows much more than I do, but Liz always said there isn't a shortage of nurses. There's a shortage of nurses willing to work under these conditions. And it's kind of a catch-22. It's a snowball effect. There's short staff, so people are not happy. So nobody wants to, go work there. So that means there's not as many people there. So now they're short-staffed and nobody wants to work. It just kind of gets worse. But um, she thought that if we could support the nurses and make their work experience better, pay them what they're worth, give them the support they need, that more nurses would be willing to work, and that would start to snowball in the other direction and would start to get better. I don't know, like I said, not my area of expertise, but her other kind of theory was that hospitals are only going to listen to money. So you're going to have to get CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, involved. They're going to have to put pressure on hospitals in the area of nurse staffing before any changes are going to be made. I'm not sure what I think.
That is true in regards to
Sure
like the CMS pressure, but I do agree with that. And I would argue that all the time with my manager. It's like, up front, why not be proactive instead of reactive, right? Up front, initially, it's going to look like you're losing money. But once you get a great working environment, nurses are going to stay, nurses are going to work there, nurse turnover is going to decline. You're going to not need to hire as many travel nurses, or you may not even need to hire travel nurses. So the nurses you have will stay. You're going to have more experienced nurses, so less issues with like less sentinel events, less patient decline, things of that sort. So you're saving money on litigation. It's just a win-win. They just have to put the money up front to get the ball rolling, but they refuse to do that. They always want to play catch up.
mm-hmm. And if it's a hospital, and if you're already dealing with a shortage of beds, period, right? So if you already have a shortage of beds in a geographic area, then you already know, okay, there's going to be delays getting into that bed, getting put into the right bed, getting the right care that you need, or there's going to be delays because there's only so many beds. There's only so many
Well,
inpatient beds.
let's
So
make it clear though. It's the lowest beds per capita, but is it still within enough beds per capita? That's a different metric. So it may be that they're the lowest, but there's still plenty of beds to go around. I think if they could survive COVID, they could survive anything because that's when all of the hospitals hit their maximum.
well, they also put patients anywhere they could too, as well. And they didn't take other people. So other people didn't get in the hospital during COVID that, would have gone in for elective surgeries and other type of things. This hospital has really terrible
Right,
ratings,
right,
by the way, on Google. They're a 2-star on Google. I don't know how many beds they have myself. I was just looking it up. But again, I think it's just the issue here is that there's a, you know, we're now on the back end of the pandemic, right? We're seeing the result. There's a generational shift with younger people, their expectations. They're not coming into hospitals thinking I'm going to work here for 5 or 10 years. They're coming in saying I'm going to get my year experience, 2 years experience, and I'm going to bounce and I'm going to go be, I don't know, I'm going to go work in Dubai. I don't really know, right? But I think that there has to be a bit of a shift in the systems, the way that they're thinking. Oh, do we lose Scott? Um, there's got to be a
Uh,
bit of a
and
shift
Nurse
in that.
Adrian, I'm still gonna be on, but I forgot to plug in my computer. So I'm gonna remove myself and I'm gonna let you keep talking.
Oh, okay. All right. You got to plug in. All right, you guys. Bridget's got to deal with her computer. So yeah. So when we're talking about, what's the band, the Band-Aid is gone, right? We've got to be thinking about a different model of how we're bringing nurses in, retaining nurses, because we have enough RNs licensed. Now that will shift over time as people retire out, as people age out. Are we bringing in the pipeline? Are we filling in that need? Are we bringing people in from within facilities to become nurses? What kind of nursing programs are there? Most people don't realize it can take you years to get prerequisites to even get into nursing school. So we haven't made it easier to get into nursing school. We've made it really expensive. The pipeline for nursing has not changed. There's not a great way to get in.
I feel like nursing is or not. I feel like they're failing the profession of nursing at every direction. Uh,
Absolutely.
so many people want to be nurses, and then as a passionate educator, someone who loved teaching, I have a master's degree in nursing education. Most state schools will require a doctorate. So if I'm teaching undergraduate nursing students, right, associates or bachelor's degree levels, why are we requiring a doctorate? I can understand if requiring it for graduate students, but that just makes it unnecessarily difficult for
It
people
makes
that
no sense
there's such a
because
shortage of educators as well because
and they're
education
not
doesn't pay.
paying. It's also such school nursing, teaching, nursing, all that
It
pays
doesn't
nothing.
pay.
Pays
It
nothing.
doesn't.
I mean, and especially if you're, I'm in Virginia, so why would I go get a doctorate level to go teach at George Mason or Johns Hopkins where, and houses are $1 million and I'm going to go make $60,000 a year. That
Exactly.
and then I'm going to have some loans for $120,000 a year and all the time I take, right? The model has to change. We've got to really put our heads together to change this model and really, we got to stop looking to the hospital systems to do it because the other thing that's happening is AI, robotic nurses. So we have, robotic nurses or remote nurses now doing a lot of patient education, which, anything that can be outsourced and done remotely is going to start happening, whether that's a licensed nurse that's in another country where they can pay them very, very low wages, right? That's already happening in case management. A lot of people that are, oh, I want that great job at home being a case manager. Well, guess what? That's going to be around for maybe another couple of years, and then all those jobs are going to go bye-bye. So until we start legislating, like we got to keep these jobs here in this country, one, and we've got to increase that pipeline and that pathway and increase the ability for people to teach, right? Like you're saying, it's just, we're going to get ourselves into an untenable situation. And the people that will pay the price are the public. The
Yes.
public is going to pay the ultimate price. Oh,
Oh, Scott said,
sorry, Scott.
sorry.
You're
He
so
said
oh, that's
his
great. You have
home.
home PT.
We love you, Scott. Have a good session.
Yeah, do your PT. I
Yeah,
always
very
hear people
important.
say, "Oh, I started PT, but I didn't finish." I'm like, I love PT. I was like, my physical therapist saved me." So yeah. So again, this is just a really sad situation. I encourage everybody to continue with this story and keep your eye on this story. Keep your eye on this strike.
And
This is
I
a week ago they
encourage
voted.
I think that when we hold hospitals accountable, and if that means litigation, if that's the way that they're finally going to change, then keep doing it. I've told my loved ones, if you go to the hospital, something like, I mean, I would sue too, you know, like
Mhm.
the hospital in Colombia killed my grandmother, but because I'm here and she's in Colombia, like, and the laws are so different, I'm not familiar with them, but my grandma went to the hospital for a scan and never came out. I mean, she was elderly,
Right.
but still, that's not an excuse.
Right.
Um, oh, I don't so this is an unpopular opinion because, Adrian, you were talking about magnet hospitals today. Unpopular opinion, magnet is not helping us in academic facilities. Amazing LPNs may not want to do a
Yeah.
bachelor's. I think that's what you mean, a bachelor's, so avoid leaving where they are to move to magnet facilities.
Right.
I think that having an LPN would be extremely beneficial if we had, for example, if every nurse had an LPN for our patients, that LPN could handle meds or vitals or something, and then we did the charting or whatever it is that we have to do. Yeah, I didn't know if you meant like BS, like the curse word, or bachelor's.
Mhm.
I just assumed it was bachelor's. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't understand. It's like nobody wants to think of a solution. They just keep throwing pizza parties at us and
And
like
they want money. The schools, these, degree mills want money. They, the online schools, the whatever they might be, these outrageously priced programs, even LPM programs. Yeah, I mean, everybody's like, "Hey, I want to get paid. I want my money," but that's not a solution, right? It's like because we don't see this tangible product like we would if a car, was getting recalled every model of a car was getting recalled from a manufacturer, right? There'd be outrage and news stories. But everybody's just like, well, this isn't, I'm not in the place to solve this problem. I'm not in the place to solve this problem. Well, you are. And the schools have definitely failed. I would say that the place of real failure has been in these schools to be able to expedite students getting their prereqs done. I mean, like just for me, I took me 5 years to do my prereqs because unless you're taking them within a system where now you're going to pay to take the prereq, so now you're already going to be invested in your 100 grand, right? And you may or may not make it. Then what? Or these schools that go belly up. There's a big one sitting over here by me in Virginia that went belly up. So all
yeah,
these
your
people
choice
wasted.
of school is so important. Your choice of school is so important. Make sure you select a reputable school that's been around for years, possible, like preferably public, because you know that they're going to be
Mhm,
around versus private. My husband did go to a private school, uh, and he had to pay significantly more money than I did. So just keep that in
mhm,
mind. I mean, if you have the money, fantastic, because of course, like the company I work with now, I mean, there's some really big heavy hitters. Like a lot of them, and I'm talking about like the physicians in charge, like some of them, Harvard, Yale, like of course that looks
mhm,
better if you can afford it, right? But if you're someone like me, first generation, my parents came from Colombia. I'm the
mhm.
first person going to college. Like I can't afford that. And I don't want to be in debt for the rest of my life.
Right.
So there's no shame in doing the public schools system. And exactly, Simaware said loans last forever. And
Mhm.
just I just kind of did that. And I went to UCF for my bachelor's, my master's, and my post master's as a FMP. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I think that there's so much to be said. The public, if I could say to the public, do one thing, please support public education and nursing programs in the public community college system. And we have to start mandating. The other part here on the flip side, folks need to understand is Great. You can have a college down the street that's going to say, we're going to open 100 spots for RNs. We're going to add 100 more students. Well, if you don't have hospitals that will give you clinicals and give you clinical sites, then you have a problem. Here's another thing we need to do. I very much believe this. If you are taking Medicare money, I believe you should be mandated and have no choice about taking students. You should have to be a clinical site, period, if you are taking students. But again, these hospitals will say, well, I don't want to take, or long-term care facilities will say, I don't want to do LPNs. I don't want to do nurses. I don't want to do CNAs. I don't want to be a clinical site. That should not be allowed. We should stop allowing that. Those two
And I
things would
loved having
help go
nursing
a long
students. They
way.
were so helpful. Like, even if it's getting the I can't like I can't find my words today, but you know, like that pink jug that you give all patients. Like,
Oh, yeah.
even if it's just grabbing the jug of water, or like,
Right.
there's so much you can tell nursing students to do that's non-invasive. That, you know, depending on what level they are. But I loved having students. They were an extra pair of eyes. If you were worried about a patient, go sit in the room with them and talk to them. You know.
Right. Right. I mean, we at one point in the hospital I used to work at did even night clinicals at one point, which isn't really preferable. You don't see as much, but that was because of the demand. We had to, the hospital said, hey, we're willing to do that. They were willing to work with the community college and a smaller community. But these hospitals, if they want nurses, they've got to start opening up very broad for clinical sites. And these schools need to start really prioritizing getting those 5 main classes for prereqs and getting those available to students. So they're, because again, if I need microbiology and I'm now a returning student, I don't have priority registration. I went to 15 colleges to try and get into microbiology and chemistry, from San Diego to San Luis Obispo. I was willing to drive 200 miles if I had to take microbiology and chem to get into nursing school. So, that's ridiculous, right? That's just absurd. And luckily, I was able to get into an anatomy and a physiology course that was on a Saturday, which was the only one offered, and only because there was some woman who was 100 years old still teaching it, right? Because it's, all day. So again, we've got to solve some of these issues, and I just have not seen these issues being solved. Online is not, it's not the answer just to do things online. We deal with real people, real humans. We need to get in the clinical sites, start, you got to be in front of that patient to really get that skill and imprint that muscle memory. And these hospitals and facilities should be happy to be clinical sites and be really partnering with schools on a higher level, because you want to get them into your system. You want to
Yeah.
say, hey, this is a great place to work. But instead they're like, hey, maybe we're kind of crappy to work at. So we don't want you to see us before, we want to like trick you at the job fair. So yeah,
Well,
Eloise, yeah, the UK system, I mean, and the pay is really different too. I know. I mean, Nurse Craig, there's a Craig RN on TikTok, is a big UK nurse creator. Um, yeah, they're finishing not right. We need diversity. Absolutely, absolutely, we need diversity. 100%. I mean, just even like the hospital I used to work at, like they used to do Spanish classes, right? And then they stopped doing Spanish classes. It's like, well, okay, well, we were in a majority Spanish speaking community. Why not figure out a way to help the nurses learn Spanish? Incentivize that. Oh no, we're going to pay a translation service, because
I will say, as a minority, and in my NP program, it was primarily, it's primarily Caucasians, right? We had maybe like one Asian girl, maybe one Black girl, and I was like the Spanish girl, right? So when you are a minority, maybe when you're white, you don't realize the lack of diversity because you're surrounded among your peers, but it is painfully aware for us when you are a minority. And I'm
yeah.
so glad. And it goes to everything, like TV shows. Like, I'm so happy that now there's more diversity in TV shows. Growing up, I never had anyone to to look up to that looked like me. It was all like white
Mhm.
actors. Um, and I do feel as a minority that sometimes I have to be like the circus bear, like be better, perform
Right.
better, just to even be at the same level or be considered. Or I just feel like I have to be exceptional when other people can just be uh okay, you know,
Oh, 100%.
in order to get
100%.
even the position or to be considered, like,
Mhm.
it just doesn't yet seem equal. It does not feel that way.
Oh, it's nowhere near equal. I mean, the gatekeeping, the most gate-kept place is the academia, right? Academia is the most gate-kept place. I mean, it was a bastion of, Anglo women, for decades and decades and decades. And that is still, again, if you've got to get a doctoral degree, I mean, there's just so much gatekeeping that happens in that arena and in higher education, so in advanced practice. So I think that is so true what you're saying, and so authentic and felt, because many of us might be the first people to go to college in our family system, but we all have a different background, and our own orientation. But it's important, if you are, like for me, obviously I present as white, so but it's important, like, that I ask those questions. Well, why isn't there more diverse student body here? Why isn't there a more, diverse, nursing or leadership? Again, nursing leadership is another area where you often don't see a lot of diversity. But again, it's all this gatekeeping that goes on, and which is a great topic for us to talk about later at another time. That could be a whole series. There's a lot of nurses on TikTok that talk about that. Cookie the writer, and there's just a ton of nurses who discuss that. And I think it's yeah, we've got to be able to see ourselves, our own reflection, to see that possibility, right? And it's 2023, so it's time for that to happen for sure.
All right. Well, I think
Yeah.
that's a great place to end. Thank you, everyone that joined. Make sure you subscribe to Nurse Adrian's channel. That's your channel, Nurse Adrian RN, or what's your channel called?
Yeah, Nurse
Oh,
Adrienne RN up
yeah,
here, right here. I
perfect.
I know.
Make sure that you subscribe to Nurse Scott's channel. Make sure you subscribe also to my channel. And we appreciate you. And I am trying to go live every Friday at 3:30. But life can happen and will happen, I'm sure.
We'll see. And I'll try and jump in whenever I can based on my schedule. So we'll see. All right, you guys.
Perfect.
Thanks so much. Great
Bye.
topic. Let's stay tuned. Bye bye.